They themselves created this disease by the foods that they were eating.
How did our society get to this point?
Can plants prevent and reverse disease? I was 51 years old and I just wasn't feeling young anymore. Both my parents had health problems in their early 60s and both developed adult onset diabetes. My mother suffered from heart disease and obesity as well in her 60s. I chalked it up to getting old, a simple fact of my genetic fate. After years of intense research and schooling, I came to the conclusion that the American diet was killing me. Can we take control of our health? Well, I'm here to tell you that I took control of my lab results and health. This is my journey to attaining a healthy and disease-free life. Join me while I talk with experts, discuss the science, identify what foods are good and what foods are bad, and create delicious, fast, whole plant-based meals in our kitchens.